The courtroom was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the kind that presses down on your chest. You could hear the clock tick, the shuffle of paper, the creak of the judge's chair. 17-year-old Khalil Dawson stood beside the public defender, wrists cuffed in front of him. Orange jumpsuit, a size too big. Eyes on the floor. He didn't say anything. He hadn't said much since the night of the arrest. At the back of the room, his mother, Nina, sat with both hands clenched tight in her lap. She hadn't slept. You could tell from her eyes. They were red, swollen, tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. She'd called every lawyer she could. No one answered, or they said it was too late, or too expensive. The judge didn't look up right away, just flipped through a few papers on his desk. Then he spoke. In the case of the state of Georgia versus Khalil Dawson, this court finds the defendant guilty on all charges. There was no pause, no emotion in his voice. It was like reading off a grocery list. Sentencing is as follows: life in prison, without the possibility of parole. That was it. No explanation, no moment to breathe. Nina gasped, loud, like the air had been punched out of her. No, please. He didn't do this. Please, Your Honor. She tried to stand, but her knees buckled. She hit the ground with a dull thud, hands splayed, elbows scraping the floor. A sob escaped her lips, raw and sharp. No one helped her. Not the guards, not the bailiff, not even the lawyer who had stood beside her son. The judge didn't flinch, didn't even glance in her direction. Khalil didn't move, didn't blink. He just stood there. Still. Quiet. In his hands he held a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges. It was a drawing. A charcoal sketch of his mother reading under the lamp in their living room. He'd drawn it the night before the arrest. Now it was crumpled between his fingers. The bailiff stepped forward. Let's go. Khalil didn't resist, didn't ask a single question. As they walked him toward the side door, he glanced over his shoulder and saw his mother on the floor, still reaching toward him. Her mouth moved like she was praying, or maybe just trying to breathe. The door closed behind him with a solid click. The room was already moving on to the next case. He wasn't just sentenced. He was discarded, forgotten, erased. Before the trial. Before the orange jumpsuit. Before the sentence that took everything. Khalil Dawson was just a quiet kid with a sketchbook. He lived with his mom in a small second-floor apartment on Westmore Street. One bedroom, one couch, one little kitchen. They didn't have much. But it was home. And for Khalil, that was enough. He wasn't the type to draw attention, didn't talk much in class, didn't hang around in big groups, but he noticed things. The way a teacher's shoulders tensed when they were having a bad day. How light hit the side of the school building just right before the sun went down. He kept it all in his head. Then later, he'd put it on paper. Khalil loved to draw, always had. He carried his sketchbook everywhere, even to lunch, even to the bus stop. Some of the pages were full of faces, classmates, teachers, people he saw on the street. Others were scenes, a broken fire hydrant, the corner store on 5th, his mom asleep on the couch with a book in her lap. He didn't post his drawings online, didn't show off, didn't need to. But there was one place where he felt seen, the county library, 6 blocks from school. They had a scanner in the back corner, near the genealogy section. Old, slow, but clean. That's where he went after school to scan his best pieces. Miss Gloria, the librarian, always smiled when she saw him come in. Back again, Khalil? Those art schools won't know what hit them when they see your work. She meant it, too. She was the first person, outside of his mom, who told him he was gifted. Khalil would nod, shyly. Thanks, Miss Gloria. Then he'd get to work. He scanned portraits, cityscapes, abstracts, anything he was proud of. He named each file carefully. Saved them on a flash drive. Because he had a goal. He was applying for the Art Future Scholarship, a national program that could get him into a top art school. Full ride. He knew the odds were slim. Thousands of applicants. But still, he believed. This was the biggest thing he'd ever tried for. The day he got the recommendation letter from his English teacher, he didn't tell anyone right away. He just tucked it into the inside pocket of his sketchbook and walked home slow, like he was carrying something sacred. That night, he picked up dinner from the corner store. A sandwich for himself. Strawberries for his mom, her favorite. He always bought them when he had a little extra allowance. When he got home, she was folding laundry in front of the TV. He handed her the small container, and she smiled, tired but soft. You remembered, she said. Of course, he replied, already pulling out his pencil. He sketched her as she sat there, folding a worn t-shirt. The way her brow furrowed in focus, the curve of her hand as it moved through the fabric. He didn't show her the drawing. Not yet. He was saving that one for later, to put in the scholarship folder, under a section he'd titled Home. It happened on a Thursday, late afternoon, the kind of day where the sun feels warm on your back and you forget, just for a second, that anything bad could be waiting around the corner. Khalil had just finished scanning his artwork at the library. Everything went smooth. He double-checked his files, packed up his sketchbook, and headed home. But first, he stopped at the corner store. Martinez Market. He went there all the time. He grabbed a bag of chips, a chocolate bar, and a small container of strawberries for his mom. It came to 6.75 cents. You working on something big? Mr. Martinez asked from behind the counter. Khalil nodded. Scholarship stuff. The man smiled and handed him the change. Khalil stepped outside, plastic bag in one hand, sketchbook tucked under his arm. He'd only taken a few steps when it happened. Screech. Tires. 2 police cruisers pulled up fast. No sirens. Just presence. Loud, flashing, full of force. Before Khalil could turn around, on the ground, hands where we can see them. He froze. Another voice behind him, louder, harsher. I said, get down. Then hands, rough, grabbing his arms, yanking him back. The bag of snacks hit the sidewalk. Strawberries burst open. Juice smeared across the pavement in long red streaks. The sketchbook fell, pages fluttering, graphite lines smudging in the wind. Someone slammed him face first onto the concrete. His chest hit hard. The wind rushed out of him. He heard the click of handcuffs. Cold metal bit into his skin. Young black male, blue hoodie, matches the description, one officer said to another. Khalil opened his mouth. He wanted to speak, wanted to explain, to tell them about the library, about Miss Gloria, about the scholarship folder in his backpack. But something stopped him. Not fear exactly. Memory. His mother's voice, quiet but firm. If they ever stop you, baby, don't argue. Don't run. Don't even move. Stay still. Stay alive. So he stayed still. The concrete burned his cheek. One of the officers patted him down. The chips were crushed. The chocolate bar lay in the gutter. The strawberries kept leaking, small red pools trailing toward the curb. And the sketchbook, it lay open. Pages ripped, artwork exposed. A drawing of his mom curled on the living room couch, now torn down the center. None of the officers looked at it. We got a robbery on 47th, the taller cop said. GameStop. Witness says the suspect ran south in a blue hoodie. Khalil was still trying to breathe, still trying to understand how everything had turned in under a minute. You fit the description, one officer said, like that was the end of the conversation. He tried again. I was at the library. You can explain that downtown, the officer snapped. No one asked his name. No one asked for ID. No one checked his backpack. The back door of the cruiser opened. A hand pushed his head down. As the door slammed shut behind him, Khalil looked through the window. He saw his sketchbook lying there on the sidewalk, pages moving in the breeze. It was the last thing he saw before the car pulled away. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. But none of that mattered, because no one wanted the truth. They just wanted it wrapped up. And he looked like the kind of kid that fit the ending they already had in mind. Khalil met his public defender for the first time 10 minutes before the hearing. The man's name was Mr. Hayes. Gray suit, tired eyes, folder in one hand, phone in the other. He didn't sit, didn't ask Khalil much, just flipped through a few papers, then looked up briefly. Anything you want to say before we go in? Khalil hesitated. I was at the library. Miss Gloria saw me. There's footage. They can check. Mr. Hayes nodded, barely listening. We'll see what we can do. Then the door opened, and they were called in. The courtroom was almost empty. No jury. Just a handful of staff, a sleepy-looking bailiff, and Judge Roland Pierce on the bench. Khalil was still in cuffs. He wore a loose-fitting borrowed suit, sleeves hanging past his wrists. His mom sat behind him, eyes sunken, hands shaking in her lap. The hearing started quickly. Docket number 2039A. People versus Khalil Dawson. The prosecutor, a young woman in a crisp navy suit, stood without even glancing at Khalil. She laid out the case in 3 short minutes. A blurry, still image from a GameStop security cam. A glove found in Khalil's backpack, the kind artists use to keep graphite off their hands. A partial fingerprint on that glove. That was their evidence. Mr. Hayes said nothing at first. When prompted by the judge, he stood awkwardly and cleared his throat. My client is a student. No prior record. He was at the public library at the time of the alleged robbery. Do you have any witnesses? The judge asked, without interest. No, Your Honor. We've been unable to reach the librarian. Then came the first and only time Khalil tried to speak. Please, I wasn't there. Ask Miss Gloria. She'll tell you. The prosecutor cut him off sharply. This isn't debate club. You're not here to talk. Khalil fell silent. The judge didn't respond, didn't ask what he meant. Didn't ask about the librarian. Didn't even look at him. At the clerk's desk, Elena Vargas was typing everything as it unfolded. She had worked under Judge Pierce for nearly 5 years. She knew how he operated. Fast, cold, final. But something about this case made her stomach twist. There were files she remembered seeing the day before. A time-stamped traffic cam photo from near the library. A report on the surveillance camera malfunction at the GameStop. A discrepancy in the glove's sizing. Now, those files were gone, just missing. Replaced by a smaller folder with fewer pages. She checked the system twice. Then again. But she couldn't say anything. Not yet. Not here. The judge leaned forward. The court finds the evidence sufficient for trial. Bail is denied. His gavel came down. The sound echoed off the marble walls like a door slamming shut. Khalil turned slightly, trying to look back at his mom, but the bailiff was already pulling him toward the side exit. Nina's mouth opened to speak, but no sound came out. And still, Judge Pierce never once looked at the boy he had just silenced. It wasn't a trial. It was a script, a process, a decision already made before Khalil ever stepped into that courtroom. And no matter how loud the truth tried to speak, the system had already chosen not to listen. 3 weeks after the arrest, Khalil was sitting on the edge of a narrow bunk inside the juvenile detention center. The walls were gray, the lights never turned all the way off. Time didn't move, it just dragged. That evening, during phone call hour, a guard tapped him on the shoulder. You get one call, make it quick. Khalil stood, slowly. His hands felt heavy, his fingers tingled from holding a pencil too tight for too long. There was only one number he knew by heart, and it wasn't his mom's. She couldn't afford to accept a collect call. And even if she did, what could she do? The number he dialed was one his mother had made him memorize when he was 10. Back when the man on the other end still sent birthday cards once in a while. He'd never used it. Not once. But now, he pressed the digits one by one. The line rang. In Washington, D.C., in front of a dozen cameras and reporters, Luther Pryor, the U.S. Attorney General, was in the middle of a press conference. Our department remains committed to the principles of justice and equity. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Same number. Unknown. Something about it made him pause. He lifted a hand slightly. Excuse me, he said, stepping away from the podium. He walked into the side hallway. Quiet. Neutral walls. No press, no lights. Just the hum of air vents. He answered. This is Luther Pryor. Who is this? Silence. Then a breath. Then a voice he hadn't heard in 10 years. Deeper now, but still familiar. It's me, your son. I need help. Luther didn't speak. Not at first, because it wasn't just the voice. It was everything he had walked away from. Every unopened letter, every holiday missed, every decision to stay out of it, now calling him back. The silence stretched. On the other end, Khalil almost hung up, but then Luther spoke quietly. Where are you? Georgia. Fulton County. Juvenile lockup. Another pause. What happened? Khalil swallowed. They said I robbed a GameStop. I didn't. I was at the library. They won't listen. His voice cracked. They gave me life, no parole. Luther leaned back against the wall. His hand trembled. The hallway felt colder now, quieter. The kind of quiet that demanded everything. An hour later, Luther sat alone in his office. The lights were low, the blinds were drawn. His suit jacket was draped over the chair, his tie hung loose around his neck. He stared at nothing. On his desk sat a stack of policy reports, drafts of reform speeches, initiatives with bold titles like Justice Reimagined. They all felt meaningless now, because for all the work, all the power, all the talk about fairness and equality, he couldn't even protect his own son. He'd spent a lifetime building a system he believed in, and in a single 5-minute call, he realized that system had broken the one person he'd never meant to leave behind. Luther Pryor didn't sleep that night. After the call with Khalil, he sat alone in his office. Lights off, tie loosened, silence pressing down like a weight. The U.S. Attorney General, the top law enforcement official in the country. And his son was sitting in a concrete cell, sentenced to die inside it. He didn't reach for a drink, didn't reach for a speech. He opened his laptop instead. Typed, Dawson, Khalil, case 1245 JD, Fulton County. The documents loaded slowly, line by line, image by image. The first red flag came fast. The traffic cam footage that allegedly showed Khalil near the crime scene. Metadata had been altered. The shadows didn't match the son's position that day. License plates in the background were too clear, too perfect. Deepfake. He forwarded it to his cybersecurity advisor. Then he opened the forensic report, a partial glove print, marked inconclusive in the initial lab notes, but in the final version, somehow marked probable match. He cross-checked the lab's record. It wasn't the first time they'd tightened the language. Then he pulled Judge Pierce's record. And that's when everything shifted. Charts, sentencing patterns, dozens of juvenile cases, almost all young black males. Average trial time, 1.8 days. Defense objections, frequently overruled. Plea deals ignored. Maximum sentences in 94% of cases. Each line felt like a betrayal. Not of the law, but of what the law was supposed to mean. By morning, Luther had printed a dozen reports. He stared at them, spread across the floor of his office like crime scene photos. If I do this, he thought, I'll destroy everything I've built. Every policy, every reform package, every future political step. Because this wasn't just one judge, it was a system designed to cover itself. If he exposed it, the backlash would be brutal. That afternoon, he made one call. Professor Matthews, retired now living in North Carolina. Matthews had taught him tort law and constitutional ethics, and more importantly, had never bought into politics. They met in a quiet cafe near the DOJ building. Luther sat down, eyes hollow. I have to ask you something, he said, and I need you to tell me the truth. Matthews stirred his coffee. Go ahead. If it were your son, and you knew the system failed him, what would you do? Matthews looked at him. I'd remember why I became a lawyer, and I'd burn the whole system down if I had to. That night, Luther returned to the DOJ under cover of darkness. No security briefings. No press staff. No cameras. Just purpose. He summoned 4 junior attorneys, all under 30. Smart. Ungraduated by cynicism. The kind of people who still believed the law could mean something. Sarah Chen, tech law. Marcus Wright, criminal defense. Daniela Ruiz, civil rights litigation. Jamal Thomas, federal procedure. They gathered in a quiet corner conference room, blinds drawn, phones off. Luther spoke simply. You don't speak of this outside this room. You report only to me. We're opening an investigation into Judge Roland Pierce and every case he's touched in the last 10 years. Sarah blinked. On what grounds? Corruption, suppressed evidence, judicial misconduct. You'll see it all. He handed them flash drives, marked only by color. Start with Khalil Dawson. But don't stop there. He'd spent his whole life climbing to the top of the justice system, and now the only way to save his son was to tear that system down. Not for revenge, not for politics, but for truth. And this time, he wasn't going to look away. Elena Vargas had always been the kind of person the system liked. Quiet, efficient, invisible. She typed fast, kept her head down, followed rules. 5 years under Judge Pierce had taught her how to survive. Don't ask questions, don't get noticed, don't care too much. But now, every time she tried to sleep, she saw his face. The quiet kid with the sketchpad, Khalil Dawson. Just a boy. The email was short. No name, no signature. I have documents, internal memos, evidence that was removed. Please meet. No cameras, no names. Just truth. Her hand hovered over the mouse. She clicked send and immediately regretted it. But it was too late. 2 days later, in a quiet cafe near the edge of downtown, she waited. The place was nearly empty. A couple at the far wall, a barista humming off-key. Outside, cars passed slowly under the spring sun. Elena sat near the window, a wool coat wrapped tight around her. On her lap, a worn canvas bag with a single USB drive inside. Her fingers traced the stitching over and over again. Then, 2 people entered. Early 30s, plain clothes, alert eyes. They spotted her. Sarah Chen and Marcus Wright from Luther Pryor's private task force. They sat down, cautious but kind. Miss Vargas? Sarah asked gently. Elena didn't answer. She simply reached into her bag and slid the USB across the table. Everything's on there. The original traffic footage, memos, internal notes. Watch the timestamps. Judge Pierce pulled Khalil's file the morning before it was reassigned. She kept her voice low. Even in a near-empty room, she glanced over her shoulder. He moved the case to his own docket. Broke protocol. No review. Sarah frowned. Why would he do that? Elena paused, then looked up. Because his nephew, Thomas Pierce, is the director at Central Juvenile Detention, the same facility Khalil was sent to. Marcus's jaw tightened. That wasn't disclosed in court. It was buried, like everything else. She reached for her cup. The coffee had gone cold hours ago. A week ago, someone broke into my apartment, she said quietly. They didn't take my laptop. They didn't touch my jewelry. They rifled through my brother's immigration papers, his green card file. Sarah's brows drew in. That's a threat. Elena gave a hollow laugh, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Yeah, I got the message. She fell silent for a moment. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded note, a sketch Khalil had once left behind on his courtroom bench. A small, rough pencil drawing. It was her. Typing, head down, a little tired, a little proud. He used to draw in court, she whispered. Little things, corners, people. He saw everything, even me. Her eyes glistened. That's why I'm here, not because I'm brave. I'm not. But he saw me when no one else did, and now the whole system's pretending not to see him. She exhaled. I can't stay quiet anymore. He was just a boy, and they're trying to erase him like he never mattered. Sarah and Marcus didn't speak right away. Instead, they watched her. Not with suspicion, but with something close to awe. Not every hero shows up wearing armor. Some show up in sensible shoes, clutching a cup of cold coffee and refusing to disappear. Elena Vargas was never meant to be a hero. She was a court clerk, a footnote, a silent hand behind the record. But in a system built on silence, even a whisper can start an earthquake. And in that cafe, one whisper was just about to shake the whole system apart. The walls were always the same, gray, damp, still. But something inside Khalil had shifted. He wasn't sleeping, not well. The nights bled into each other, one long corridor of silence. But in that silence, he began to draw. It started with Marcus, the older man from the laundry unit. A gentle giant with soft eyes and a daughter who wrote poems for school recitals. Khalil asked him to describe her. She's got my nose, Marcus said, smiling. And her mama's stubbornness. Khalil drew her too, in the corner of the page, standing on a stage made of notebook paper. Next was Deshaun, barely 18, who sang old Motown songs while he mopped the floor. Then Carlos, who dreamed of owning a food truck. Tony, who loved sci-fi books and had read Dune 3 times. William, who coaxed green life from plastic containers in the prison courtyard. Each sketch held more than just lines. They held memory, voice, presence. One day, during rec time, Jamal, Khalil's quiet, watchful cellmate, handed him a bundle. Got it from the library lady. Real paper, not the cheap kind. Inside, 5 sheets of textured artist paper, the kind Khalil hadn't touched since the day of his arrest. Jamal leaned in. Use it before they take it. In here, what you make, that's the only thing they can't erase. But word got around. The guards started watching. Not openly, just a little too quiet when he passed. A little too interested in what he held in his hands. So Khalil worked faster. And when the volunteer coordinator, a retired school teacher named Miss Lavinia, came by for literacy tutoring, he slid an envelope into her supply tote. No name, no return address. Just one word written on the front in pencil, Inside Voices. 2 weeks later, the sketches began to circulate, first among community art collectives, then on social media, then in civil rights forums. People saw them, not as drawings, but as declarations. Each portrait bore a name, a story, a favorite song lyric, or a quote from a daughter's poem. One sketch showed an older man, eyes closed, with the words, "She used to hum gospel while cooking. I still hear it in my sleep." Another, a young man staring out a cell window, captioned, "I only ran because I was scared, not because I was guilty." The campaign caught fire. Inside Voices trended across platforms. Human rights lawyers reposted. Artists offered to replicate the works as murals. One gallery in D.C. cleared a wall for a full installation. Back in his cell, Khalil heard nothing. No internet, no news, no outside sound. But one day during library hour, a new inmate passed him a slip of paper. It read, "People out there are starting to hear us. They see what you drew. They see us." Khalil folded it slowly, tucked it into the spine of his sketchbook, and whispered, not to anyone else, but to the space around him. You can lock us up, but you can't erase who we are. In a place built to strip identity, Khalil had found a way to give it back. Not just to himself, but to everyone the system tried to turn into numbers. With pencil and paper, he was turning inmates back into people. The hearing room smelled of old paper and polished wood. Golden morning light spilled through the high windows, casting long shadows over senators hunched above their folders. In the center sat Luther Pryor, no longer just the Attorney General. This morning, he wasn't a politician. He was a father, and this was no ordinary briefing. This was a reckoning. He didn't read from a script. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached for a thick dossier and laid it on the desk before him. With hands steady, but only just, he opened to the first page. A silence fell across the chamber. Sentencing logs, racial breakdowns, case timelines that barely lasted 48 hours. Each page told the same quiet horror. Fast-track trials, max sentences. Black boys vanished without question. Luther didn't need to dramatize it. The numbers did that for him. But then, he clicked a button. The room darkened as a projector screen lit up. Not with graphs, not with stats, but with faces. One by one, Khalil's portraits filled the screen. A man with weary eyes and a crumpled poetry page in his pocket. A teenage boy staring through a window drawn in graphite. A father holding a child's toy beneath a caption, "She still asks when I'm coming home." The room held its breath. On the other side of the Capitol, the streets were not quiet. Protesters lined the marble steps, banners held high, "Justice for Khalil. Erase corruption, not our kids." Inside voices, outside truth. A group of law students formed a silent circle, each one holding a printed portrait. Above them, on the courthouse wall, a massive projection of Khalil's sketchbook flickered in the sunlight. The media lit up. News anchors spoke in hushed tones as they played split screens. One side showed Luther standing at the podium, jaw clenched in restraint. The other, Khalil's pencil drawings scrolling like testaments across the screen. New York Times, justice system rocked by evidence of judicial bias. NPR, teens art campaign becomes national movement. CNN, inside voices exposes years of courtroom misconduct. The pressure was no longer political. It was public. It was personal. Back inside the hearing room, Luther spoke again. This time softer, almost to himself. "I once believed the system could fix itself. I believed in the slow crawl of justice." He looked up, meeting the senator's eyes, one by one. But justice delayed isn't justice, and for too many, it's never even been an option. That day, Luther didn't just expose one judge. He peeled back a curtain the nation had refused to touch, revealing a rot that stretched far beyond Khalil. And in doing so, he turned whispers of injustice into a nationwide roar. Outside, the chant built like a tide rising. "Justice for Khalil. End racist courts. We see you now." In that moment, it was no longer about one boy. It was about all the names no one had spoken, all the faces the courts had turned away from. And now, the nation was finally looking. The federal appeals courtroom was nothing like the one where Khalil had first been sentenced. There were no fluorescent flickers, no rushed files, no eyes that looked past him like he wasn't there. Here, the light poured in through arched windows. Here, they were ready to listen. Judge Diana Martinez sat at the bench, her presence calm but commanding, a woman who had once defended the very people the system forgot. She adjusted her glasses, looked around the room, and nodded. "We will now hear the appeal of Mr. Khalil Dawson." This time, Khalil wasn't alone. Beside him sat a team of civil rights attorneys. Behind him, his mother Luther, and the weight of a nation watching. The evidence was laid bare like bones, tampered footage, buried reports. A judge with financial ties to the very prison Khalil was sent to. Then came the voice no one expected. Witness A, hidden behind a screen, voice distorted, but words cutting clear. Elena Vargas, she spoke of late-night document removals, of trial records sealed too soon, of Judge Pierce pulling Khalil's case, bypassing all standard protocol. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. He knew the boy was innocent, and he chose to silence him anyway. When the testimony ended, a hush fell over the room. Judge Martinez turned to Khalil. Her tone wasn't cold like Pierce. It was careful, human. "Mr. Dawson, before I deliver the ruling, is there anything you'd like to say?" He stood, still thin, still quiet, but steady. He glanced at his mother, then at Luther. then out to the world beyond the courtroom. I didn't want to be a symbol, he said softly. I just wanted to make art. But if what happened to me helped someone else, then maybe it was worth it. He sat back down and waited. Judge Martinez didn't pause. Based on the overwhelming new evidence, including proof of judicial misconduct and due process violations, this court vacates the previous conviction. Mr. Khalil Dawson, you are free to go. There was no outburst, no dramatic gasp, just the sound of a mother quietly weeping into her hands. Just the slow, deliberate exhale of a boy who'd been holding his breath for far too long. That night, back in his old bedroom, Khalil sat on the edge of his bed. The posters were faded, the books untouched. But the silence felt different now, no longer oppressive, just open. He reached into the drawer, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, walked to the wall, and pinned it up, blank, white, waiting. A beginning. They tried to erase him, erase his voice, his future, his name. But now, the whole world is listening. And Khalil is just getting started. If Khalil's story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful human stories that deserve to be told. Your support helps us keep going. One voice, one truth, one story at a time.